Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my podcast. I'm Heimo Scheuch, the CEO of Wienerberger. And today I have a great pleasure to have a special guest directly from Berlin with me. And Mrs. Hoppmann is also the founder of Climate Mind.
Yes.
And I'm looking forward to this discussion about society, the change, our perception of the climate crisis. And let's start with it. Hannah, when I was young, I was reading Hemingway. Mm-hmm. And I was passionate about his books. And you know, Ernest Hemingway, he fought in the First World War. And then after the war, he lived in Paris. And this generation was called the Lost Generation. And they were Americans living in Paris especially, and not knowing what the future would bring to them. And when I look today, especially now in the Germanic background, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, a lot of young people call them letzte Generation, last generation. And I think it's a little bit frightening for me if I look at them, what they do when they sit in front of cars in a city and block the traffic and call themselves last generation. Isn't this, from your perspective, you are working a lot with people and about psychology, isn't this a dangerous development?
Well, I work as a climate psychologist and as a consultant and trainer on training leadership skills for the civil society, but also for political leaders and administration as well as civil society. And I think it's not a dangerous development, but it's a really understandable development, as there are a lot of young people internationally who perceive a lot of fear, sadness, and also anger about how, that not enough is happening about the climate crisis. They feel betrayed by companies, but also betrayed by their own governments. And we must admit, it's not only young people feeling betrayed, but also adults worldwide. A lot of adults worldwide are protesting and asking for change. So for me, it's a really understandable situation in the way of that we really having challenging crisis and not having enough solutions at all.
But isn't it also an aspect of, if I may say so, from a civil society perspective, and we'll come to the responsibility of leaders, if it's in industry, in business, or also in politics later. But isn't it a very important subject also, the own responsibility that each of us has in civil society? Because actually every one of us can do something good at the end of the day. And when you are lost somehow, you don't know what to do. And I would call it the common sense. Common sense means for me to wake up in the morning and to do things that are good for you and for the society and for environment. But I doubt that it is good that I set such sort of actions like we had, for example, on the Berlin airport, and then find myself 3 weeks later somewhere in Thailand on a vacation. And what is then actually the real sort of interest of these people? Do they really want to change something, or is it more or less because I have nothing to do? I'm just provocative for a moment.
I think a lot of young people have a huge amount of intrinsic motivation to drive societal change, systems change forward towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And on the same time, as we all know, leaders on the C-level, but also politicians and people from civil society, we always have these contradictions. We call it in psychology the cognitive dissonance, that we have values on the one side and behaviors on the other. And nobody is perfect. How can we manage? Everybody still tries to have a good time, tries to go on vacation. So there's always this contradiction, which of course is not easy to deal with. And often is portrayed in media. Of course, it's a nice topic to talk about. But in the end, it's a topic of our time, because when we try our best, we will never succeed perfectly until the end. Because we live in structures, we live in a context where sustainable behavior is not possible so far because there are no sustainable structures.
That's a very good point. And now we come actually, and I appreciate your comment about the individual responsibility and how everybody perceives the current situation. And now let's come a little bit to what we as leaders in business and also in politics and also in media, by the way, should play in the future. Because you're absolutely right. Is there a sustainable structure in order to manage this well? I think, and I would throw in our discussion the thesis that we, and I'm a representative of industry, if I may say so, are doing a lot in this aspect. Not only because regulations are changing, because it's in our own interest to do this. Take, for example, a company like ours. We produce materials to rebuild a city of 300,000 people every year and have a lot of output also in the piping. When we do water supply, for example, we can go with the annual output 20 times around the globe every year. So you have a big responsibility towards the society, the people, the environment. At the end of the day, we work a lot with our own people. Educate them, responsibility on a plant level, in the different management layers. Probably you will say not enough, and we are doing this more and more. But what I see also that the changes in government, in the state management, in the administration, are somehow a little bit slow. Mm-hmm. Yeah? And the alignment of interest that we basically say sustainability is something we really want to achieve. There's a lot of talking, and what I miss is the action, if I may say so.
Walking the talk, yes,
right.
Exactly. That's what we're needing all around. So internationally, we need it in big organizations, politicians, administration, but also industries. I think also in a societal dimension, we are there. A lot of values are there, a lot of intentions are there, and now it's the time to really act, to not just discuss, but to really put radical in the way of tackling the roots of the problems, to really put radical action into place.
What is your perception? Should the radical action come from the leadership, or should it be a common approach?
Of course, both.
Yes,
we can only find solutions when all the different levels work together. I'm a big fan of unconventional partnerships of, for example, social enterprises, big corporates, civil society, NGOs, and academia. I think in the end, we need to think about how to find systemic solutions for our systemic problems, and we can only find them together. So I think it's about the responsibility, finding the purpose, for example, of a company. What is the topic I really want to tackle? For example, for Wienerberger, it's about affordable, fair, sustainable buildings and sustainable living circumstances, and finding allies to work together with. I think that's really crucial. So in the end, of course, we need very much conscious civil society. We need advanced and sustainably thinking politicians, a fast and less bureaucratic administration, and of course also the leaders who really dare to also work about themselves and educate themselves, being more authentic. Because so far, leaders in industry, they are not authentic enough to really drive the change as we need to.
You might be right, and as you said yourself at the beginning, we all are only humans, and we fail, and there's a development to be done. And I would say that certainly in business, in the industry, you have people who are not yet at this stage. Yes. I agree with you. But on the other hand, I will sort of throw a little bit also provocative statement to you again. How can you deal with governments? How can you deal with international bodies like the EU that get changed every 4 years, and they're in continuous election process? And sustainable means to be long-term. Yeah? So we actually must write certain principles in our constitutions that are not political subjects for everyday discussions, because otherwise every government can change the approach to sustainability as they like. And for us in business, it needs a long-term vision. If you want to make out of Europe a net zero carbon, for example, area, which is doubtful because obviously we cannot be isolated on this planet because we have other big regions that we have to work with. But if, provided you want to do that, you need to have it on a long-term perspective. Yeah, and you need governments that support this, that actually work in favor of such things. And this I miss today, as I may say, as a representative of business.
Of course, we need governments to think long-term, as we need business leaders to think long-term, and people from civil society to think long-term. And so we need to build structures and a context where long-term thinking, visionary thinking, systems thinking is really appreciated and also rewarded in the end. So as we are now educated so far, we are driven by short-term profit, and to change this, to change the mindset there in all the different sectors is really necessary, because future topics are long-term topics, and it doesn't make sense to just think about the next 5 years when it comes to sustainable living circumstances. It makes sense to really think it for the next 100 years.
I agree with you, 100% sort of support what you say. The problem that I see from my own and humble experience is that obviously politicians want to get re-elected. So for them, it's very critical to have short-term success. It's again a little bit working against your principle of the long term. And in the financial community, if I see the investors internationally, not by the way only the Anglo-Saxon investors, but also the European ones, have also still a very short-term mind, because it's about profitability, it's about what they can achieve as short-term profits. So changing this will be a very, very tough thing to do, I think, in the future. And it needs a lot of effort from us all.
Yeah, definitely.
Where would you start? With education, with continuous work with people, or convincing them this is the right way to go forward?
So we as Climate Mind, we focus on two theories of change on the same time. It's bottom-up change and top-down change. And I think we can't do just one, but we need to do both on the same time. As Patagonia also does, the top-down change on the sea level, and on the same time they support with the 1% for the planet, they support activist groups. So we do it in a bit similar way. So we support the civil society movements, the NGOs, to drive the campaigns forward, to really educate people, to raise awareness on these topics. And on the same time, we have our leadership programs on sustainability. And they're exactly these topics where we talked about the long-term thinking, the authenticity, the empathy and compassion that is needed to also work with the intersection of global justice and ecological issues, as well as thinking about how can we build up critical thinking, complexity thinking, systems thinking, and also in the end build people who are courageous enough and resilient enough to drive this change, not only for 3 years, but for their lifetime, basically. So we build leadership programs to really educate leaders in C-level positions to become an authentic and courageous leader, to be prepared to make decisions that are not only valid and valuable for today, but really for the next couple of decades.
I think it's very, and I can only say from my personal experience, it's a very good and very valuable sort of impact that you make there, because there's a lot to be done, also on the management side. But if I think through all this, and if I look what I said at the beginning, lost generation, shouldn't be sustainability, the climate issue, the environmental issue, all of, in a broader, holistic way, part of our education system, starting from very small? I give you an example. I told you earlier this morning when we met for a glass of good Austrian water, and no coffee, by the way, we talked about that I come from a really rural background in the Alps of Austria. And there, obviously, it was, as a kid, you learned planting trees, working with nature, and that you need to give something back to nature when you take something. And I think, obviously, when you're small and when you're growing, these principles, it's easy to understand and to learn. And you live with this, because then you feel also responsibility towards nature. Yeah? And today, with our globalization on one hand, the more urbanization that we see, and people living in cities and spending more time on smartphones and others, it's difficult to get the message across what has to be done. So I think integration processes with respect to what nature means really for us, and to make them understand that not others have to change, but yourself have to change, is also important.
Yeah. I think education, in the best case, it starts at the very beginning, with kindergarten and school. But our challenges are that urgent that we can't wait for the young generation to grow up and wait until they are in the leaders' positions. So we need to, of course, do both at the same time. We need to educate the young people to be afterwards in responsible positions and to drive the change, when they are in charge. But on the same time, we really need to find very urgent solutions, which are still thought in a long visionary term. So I like the idea of education for sustainable development that is really focusing all the different aspects: schools, businesses, universities, and so on. We all need to be educated. I totally agree. This topic of nature connectedness, it's not. We are not connected anymore to nature in this northern countries of the global north, because we are literally not living with nature anymore. So this is also a re-educating process of understanding what is actually my position in the world, my position on Earth. We as humans often think we are the only and the very powerful ones, but every person who have already been in the Amazon rainforest or another really big biodiversity hotspot directly realizes we are single humans, we are tiny. We are not powerful enough to really drive biodiversity in another way. Biodiversity is driving us. So understanding that and also being humble about who we actually are, and reconnecting to our understanding that we are just part of the system. We are part of the ecological system and not ruling it.
Absolutely agreed. And by the way, in your day-to-day work,
Yeah.
when you do your work and engage with a lot of different people from social backgrounds, do you see that there's an open-mindedness for this idea, and that they perceive your work as positive in the business world and also in the more political or administrative arena?
Yes, we receive incredibly a lot of requests from business leaders, from politicians, from administration, from big NGOs. So there's a big interest in understanding more the psychology about sustainability. So we are experts on that, understanding how people perceive climate change and sustainability, understanding why climate anxiety is such a big topic, why people are feeling powerlessness, for example. And then doing the next step of what can we actually do about it? Because, for example, in big companies, we actually need to drive a corporate culture of sustainability forward. Every single employee needs to be part of this game, needs to join the journey. And how to do this, there's still a very big question that is open for a lot of organizations. That's why they come to us, to find solutions for them personally, how to engage and encourage people to become more active on sustainability topics.
No, very passionate, and thank you for your passions. And I can only confirm we just launched 2 years ago a biodiversity program within Wienerberger, as you know, for every site, and 20,000 people are very enthusiastic. All the feedback that I get, that they can contribute something. And it comes back to what we said at the beginning. Let's start ourselves and do something good about this, and not be passive and wait for others and blame others that they have not done something or are not doing enough. I think that's very right, and I'm grateful that you could join me. Thank you very much on my podcast. It was very passionate to have you here, and hope we can engage in much more detailed discussions in the future. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's all join the movement of being a corporate that is not only net zero, but net positive, as Paul Polman is saying.
Absolutely. And I think it's like you say, in financial terms, in business terms, we always want to grow and do things better. And it's also, sustainability has to be part of it. Yeah, we need to do things better, but in a better way. For the environment as such. Yeah. Thank you very much for joining me. Thank you for listening in, and hope to see you soon.